Previously on CoinKit, we have created a Docker image that contains the Bitcoin source code, and we have built Bitcoin-D. We also have some tools of debuggery that enable us to execute Bitcoin-D under the control of a graphical debugger. This is a really good beginning for your exploration. However, we're now going to take a step away from this and take our first shot at this from the bottom-up direction. In this episode, I want to set up a development environment that will ultimately enable us to duplicate the Bitcoin functionality from scratch. Not merely to duplicate it, but to also add some new and improved features, as well as to jettison some historical relics that are only of interest to historians, not to us. But before we dive into this, please allow me to outline what I want. We need some system of source code management. I think this is self-evident, and it's self-evidently necessary. We will use Git and GitLab for this. We need a Docker image with a suitable collection of build tools. We're going to use this to ultimately build the software. We've taken a few shots at similar tasks already, so this should be pretty easy. We need some method to preserve the changes to our source code as we run the images and later stop the containers. We need a text editor. Okay, enough talk. Time for action.
Good luck.
Instead of tediously typing all this stuff in, I'm going to use a Git repository hosted on GitLab. We can then check out a suitably tagged commit and study that. Our first task is to determine a suitable location on our host's file system. Let's call it CoinKit. Open a command window centered on the directory that we will put CoinKit in. In my case, I will put it in my home directory. I think you know what this does, so no need to explain it again. Now, let's look at the files within. You can see our bare project with a README, a license, and a Docker file that specifies a beginning collection of build tools. As you may recall, we'll need G++ to compile our code and to link it. And we need GDB and GDB GUI so that we can debug it. We need Python 3 dev so that we can install GDB GUI. You'll notice that a lot of the stuff from our previous examples is not here, such as make and autoconf. We need those other things so that you can build Bitcoin-D as it is now. And we've done so you have something to experiment with now. But before we add any of those here, we're going to take a much closer look at their necessity and alternatives. Now let's build this image. Now we have our image, but don't run it quite yet. Before we run this image, I want to say a few words about Docker data volumes. As you may recall, a running Docker container may freely modify its file system. However, those changes are all dumped when we exit the container. We can, however, run an image and direct it to take one piece of the host's file system and graft it into the container's file system. In this way, we can easily share data between the host and the container. We do this by specifying suitable command line arguments when we run the image. But before I hip you to those details, there's one more minor wrinkle to consider. At this time, the source code on your host system is owned by some particular user and group. When we run the image, the container by default runs as root. If we had connected a data volume, the container will chown any file that it modifies to root. After you exit the container, those files are now chown to root. This is probably not desired behavior. There are a couple of ways to deal with this noxious behavior, none of them particularly palatable. In my humble opinion, the best way to deal with this now, in our particular circumstances, is to simply tell the container to use the host's current user and group when it does its chown thing. In that way, when we eventually exit the container, the file ownership is unmolested. As you can guess, we do this using command line arguments. Okay, that said, drum roll, please. The command to invoke this magic is, as you might guess, the U option instructs the container to use the numeric ID of the user and group from the host system. One more wrinkle about this. Realize that Unix file ownership and permission operates using these numeric IDs, not the text names that we normally see. The actual names are unimportant. Okay, there it is. Let's see if we have our source code. Ta-da! There it is.
And now for something completely different.
If I asked you to change your religion, you'd probably say, sure, no problem. If I asked you to change your gender or to possibly invent a new one, you'd also likely agree with minimal fuss. You want to change Planck's constant, the mass of the electron, speed of light? No problem. Just twiddle with some constants and recompile. Done. But if I tried to mandate the use of a particular text editor or IDE, I know I would find some serious red lines. There comes a time when we must take a stand, not one step back. This is one of those times. But relax, folks. Stay cool. I'm not going to do that. Because the source code is available to your host system. Use whatever text editor you like. Problem solved. Well, that's all for today, folks. Please be sure to come back soon for the next episode of
The CoinKit Chronicles.